Part 4, Immortal Longings. My Auntie Kath was going down the tubes, or up the tubes, depending on your relationship to relativity. She was uncontroversially dying. It was all over bar the clinical quibbling. I hadn't seen her for several years now, since I'd moved to live in America, even before, after I'd moved away from my parents' home, maybe a few weddings and funerals. She'd always been a quiet, peripheral presence to me, though not uncomforting, but as I was visiting my parents for a couple of weeks, and on being told of her condition, I decided to visit her in the hospital. And my Uncle Ron was there. My Uncle Ron, my mother's brother, sitting stoically saddened at her bedside, as if for all the world he was expecting his real wife to suddenly appear from the ladies' room, all refurbished and nose-powdered, telling him to look smart or they'd miss the last bus home. But I think my Uncle Ron was coming to the realization she was already on the last bus home. He'd missed it, and he would now have to walk back alone to an empty house. He excused himself to go to the men's room. I pulled up a chair. She did recognize me. Steve. Never having much of a bedside manner, I had no idea what I should be saying. So I took her hand and I started to massage her finger bones. If she hadn't been so sick, I think she might have fainted with shock. We'd never been much of a tactile family, but Auntie Kath's shock system had been utterly dismantled. She didn't even have the strength to flinch. "That feels nice," she said. Then she told me she'd had this dream that somebody had sent her a letter from America with a £1 note inside. And as I was the only person she knew who lived in America, she'd assumed it was from me. Then she'd woken up, she said, and now here I was. Isn't that funny? Isn't it funny how some things just happen like that? "So how you doing? How'd you like America?" "It's okay, that's nice." That was pretty much the extent of our conversation. Eventually, me Uncle Ron returned, and after some matter-of-fact pleasantries, I took my leave. "You be good." "You too." I knew I'd never see her again. A couple of days later, I returned to America, but I brought with me a £1 note. I kept it left over special, popped it into an envelope, and I sent it to her, care of me mum, to give unopened to Auntie Kath. And my mum told me later she did, and Auntie Kath had smiled when she opened it. She died a week later. I didn't go back to the funeral. Apart from not being able to afford it, I figured we'd already done what we were really meant to do together. The last time I saw my dad alive, he seemed somewhat relaxed. He's lying back on his little hospital cot in Ward B2, and he'd really enjoyed his dinner, he said. Couldn't remember what it was, but he'd really enjoyed it. And he wanted me to tell the nurse, tell her he'd really enjoyed it and he'd like it again, whatever it was. So I did. It was broccoli and pasta and a cheese sauce with rice pudding for dessert. He ate up every scrap, she said. Mr. Bellwood seems to have got his appetite back. But he didn't feel much like talking tonight. After about 20 minutes, he told me he needed to rest. I should go and enjoy myself. Go have a beer, have one for him. So I did. Told him I'd see him again as soon as I could. And next day I flew back to America to redeem me credit card points. And that night he died. I got a call from my sister the following morning. He'd refused to wear his oxygen mask, she said. They'd keep putting it on him and he'd keep taking it off and they'd put it back on. But then in the middle of the night when nobody was looking, he removed it one final time. And I like to think he'd felt strong enough to make the choice. He'd accepted his fate, his time was up. It was time to move on to a better place. Of course, I'll never know that for sure till I get to the same place. But by then, I assume it'll be too late to put it into words. I shall take my secret to the grave, or to the crematorium where my dad took his. Ashes and smoke, poof, magic. Now you see me, now you don't. But he did good, he did okay. Decent, honest, as far as I know. Hard-working, man of the people, lifelong labour man, a Yorkshire man, an Englishman, the English working man, salt to the earth. Women, just the sugar in your Liptons, put the tiger in your tank and made sure it was always kept well fed. The man was the breadwinner, shouldn't have to bake his own bread. I don't think he ever learned how to boil an egg. Me dad was a creature of very specific cultural cliched imperatives, but aren't most of us really have different cliches, same weight of imperative? I think my cliche was a starving artist. I shall maintain integrity at all costs, incorruptible, no power to sway, the powerlessness of poetry, at the mercy of nothing and nobody but my own imagination. That should solve the housing shortage in the Middle East crisis. And just because it's a cliche doesn't make it not true. To the end, I'm told, my dad argued with my sister. He could never accept her as more than just his daughter, a woman. Her duty in life to take care of him, whether she liked it or not. It was what was expected. All he seemed to expect from his two sons was an interest in sport and politics, having a pint with your mates down a pub every now and then, and resolute independence. I guess me and my brother gave him a little of what he expected. My sister gave him a hell of a lot, really. Remained resolutely, if a little ruefully accommodating to the end, no matter how much he moaned and he groaned and he belittled her sound womanly advice. Real doctors were men, nurses were women, took care of the minor details, tucked you up at night. Women were the domestic caretakers, men grappled with the big picture. Any woman who tried to transcend domesticity just wasn't worth flirting with, just wants to be a man because his men make the world go round. Women just hold it steady at the base, and puffs, queers are bizarre, slightly distasteful, but relatively harmless anomalies. Non-English speaking people are obviously foreigners. Anti-government activists, just attention-seeking fanatics who want to rock the boat because they're too bloody lazy to learn how to steer it. The monarchy, a stabilizing influence on socialism. The British Empire perfected civilization, and eventually the England soccer team will regain its rightful place as champions of the world. Because let's face it, there wouldn't be any football at all if some smart-assed English booker from rugby hadn't inflated air into that little sack of leather. David Beckham would just be England's answer to Paris Hilton, not a real man. Because my dad was a real man. As soon as he stopped feeling like a real man, I think he knew the jig was up. But he did good. He did okay. As my brother said at his funeral, in a rare moment of filial compassion, he did good. He did okay. He had a long life, 86 years, seemed to enjoy himself enough, and he definitely married the woman he loved, because there was no doubt he loved our mum. After she went demented, he took meticulous care of her, till he couldn't even take care of himself. And that's when he lost his will to live. Seems terribly reasonable. He didn't want to give up. He just had no choice. It was the only choice left, given a body that had no choice but to grow old and die. We all have to go sometime. Could be any time. The dawn of civilization, the Middle Ages, early 21st century, late afternoon, and the dead of night. Eternity needs only one moment to affirm your temporal novelty has worn off. Your body's worn out and it's time to move on. Genius can grant you just so many wishes before we all blend back into the great cosmic bottle, which is really flat no matter how much air and liquid matter it seems to contain. It must be crushingly sad, utterly terrifying, absolutely heartbreaking to have to wave bye-bye to yourself forever. Knowing all the things you're going to miss, England winning the World Cup, men landing on Mars, women landing on Venus, getting together weekends to party on Pluto, Iran and Israel uniting to reform the Red Cross nation, peace on earth, all that work you put in, all that civility you cultivated, all those hopes and dreams, all the people you met, bumped into, said hello to, had a good laugh with, shared a great adventure with, wrapped your arms around and felt the heat of not feeling alone in a world so full of lonely people. And now here you are, alone at last, lying back on your little National Health Hospital cot, helplessly at the mercy of your own imagination, your life just a flash in a pan. Now your goose is cooked, and nobody's coming over for dinner ever again.